Thank you. Morning, everyone. Wonderful to be here. I truly enjoyed Ross's presentation. It's always good to get a bit of mining terminology on presentations. GAF, we'll all have to sort of concentrate on that one. I think you kept that quite clean and tidy for a mining presentation, Ross. I think what also came out of that is the thematics that we're seeing in the industry. So when we look at global mining finance, what we're noticing is the big point of reindustrialization. That's the theme. So the short term of issues in the Middle East or those, but overall, what are we looking at in terms of the reindustrialization? And that's what seems to be, to Ross's point, that will drive the long-term view. Why do people in London now start to care about what's happening is because they can see the impact of we are short of metals. It doesn't take 6 weeks of a problem in the Middle East, and everyone realizes how short we are of sulfuric acid, short of oil, gas products, etc. We live in a just-in-time world, and as soon as there is a demand in AI, and this is the infrastructure challenge that AI is facing, it's easy to have the chips, but it's like, can you build these data centers? Do you have the power for the data centers? How are you going to build them? How are you going to power them? I saw a story recently where an aluminium refinery had been shut in one part of America because the power contract they had was more valuable to sell to an AI company. They could make more money that way. So that's how desperate. We're kind of shutting off businesses to try and move power to another business, which I understand the economics thereof, but it's kind of, that's regressive, right? We're closing things down. Rather than building an economy, you're trying to cannibalize from existing industry to advance others. And so that shows the shortage that we're going through in simple cases, but also comes back to mining, an industry that has not been given a lot of care and diligence from investors, I don't think, over probably since 2007, 6, 7, when, which reminded me walking around here in my banking days. It's been that long ago when there really was an attention given to mining and the understanding of how the demand is sort of creeping up. And I think the industrialization side is something where we're recognizing in the UK, but is recognized in the US and across Europe. And that's the fundamental sort of driver of what are we seeing, or the thematic we'll probably see over the next few years. What we're also looking at is the supply chains and critical metals. Those are the buzzwords. And I think where we look at some things is two elements. One, in critical metals, no one understands them. I don't think I would be challenged to pronounce half of the rare earth elements, let alone understand them and be able to comprehend what the processing and the cost base and what is a good versus a bad rare earths project. And this cascades through a lot of the critical metal space. I think there's a lack of knowledge within even the mining industry, let alone generalist investors and the like. And then often there is also the supply chain issue. So even if you solve your part of the, hey, we can produce this, you find that the downstream customer isn't there, or they're in a development phase. So there's this fits and starts sort of a process, or a sort of, you can't advance one without the other. And so it needs a bit more of the joined up thinking that is starting to emerge. Certainly we're seeing in the US, through the IRA program that the US implemented under the Biden administration and has continued in the current administration, of advancing critical metals supply chain development. For all the reasons we're starting to see it develop in the UK, and we've certainly seen, and the pain will come to Europe if it isn't developed that way. I would not want to be a German car manufacturer today facing the competition out of China, which can obliterate what has been an industry dominant player for over 100 years. So there are moves in that, but at the same time, there's a massive demand coming for metals. So how does Aftermath play into that thematic? Well, as mentioned, I had a background more recently as running a critical metals business. Came to the realization that it's very difficult to advance a straightforward critical metals business. You need to have, maybe go back to what people can understand and have a mixture of that. And that's what Aftermath is. It is a silver company, as the name suggests, copper, and it has some critical metal elements in manganese. And what that allows us to do is develop assets in a way that people will understand, in metals that are bankable, and then allow us to pivot and develop the other elements of the critical metals portfolio that we have without it being the be-all and end-all. It's not the only thing that this business can run on. And I think this is more what we'll see from the critical metal space, projects that are more critical metal co-product or byproduct that allows the investors, banks to look at it and invest on the bit they understand, and maybe the equity players take more of a punt on the critical, the less well understood and less developed critical metal space. Aftermath's flagship project is the Berenguela project. I'll get into that. As I mentioned, it's polymetallic. We're in Peru. We think it's a great jurisdiction. We also have some assets in Chile, which we're doing more exploration on. Again, great countries in terms of getting projects developed. We all know the struggles that we can have. You can have great assets, but in the wrong country, and it's as good as having no assets. So being in good jurisdictions where you can advance your projects, mines can get built, and that's very important. And also being able to source capital. What we found with this business, and I found, is the struggle of, I had a previous life in bauxite, which was very difficult to finance, no one understood. I've been in critical metals, very difficult to understand. And then when you're a copper silver business, people throw money at you. It's quite astounding. 4 days in December, someone approached and went, do you want $20 million? 4 days later, $20 million in the bank. I was like, is this really how it works? It apparently is, when you have a product that people are really keen to have. Quick highlights there. We obviously had a fantastic run through the end of last year, beginning of this year, in terms of the silver boom. Come off a bit, but we're still trading well, and we have a fantastic, what's good for this company is we have great liquidity. So people who do get into the stock can actually do what is very unusual in the junior mining space. You can actually sell. And get out, which is very important. As mentioned, market cap, the date there, about 250 to 300, depending on the share price of the time. Again, that gives us an advantage. It's backed by silver and copper, and so obviously we have the ability to raise money without it being tremendously dilutive to shareholders. 3 projects. Berenguela, our for a flagship in Peru. That I'll talk about in detail, but we've also got the other 2 projects, which are now, from an exploration point of view, getting a lot more attention. Now that we've been through the exploration phase with Berenguela, we're going into engineering studies, and so we're now turning a bit more attention to the other assets. So Berenguela is a polymetallic. It has silver, copper, has manganese that we can use in the EV battery world. It also has some zinc. It's beautifully located at 4,000 meters up towards Lake Titicaca. A beautiful area, not an easy place to walk around, I'll tell you that. You have to take some very deep breaths, but it's right next to a rail line. In fact, I'll show you now, it's literally, the rail line cuts the property. So we have the good fortune of being able to move the ore from the project. We'll bring it down to the coast, where we will look at putting a processing facility. Much better in terms of that. And there's also an active port where materials currently go out. Lots of copper is exported out of the port of Matarani. Sulfuric acid is imported, so a very functional port. So we're very lucky in terms of the location of the asset. Just to highlight that, historic silver workings, there's incredibly high-grade silver historically, and there was some sort of artisanal workings. You can see the little town that's there and where the railway line is. So we're a stone's throw from the railway line, so easy. As part of our PFS development, we'll create a rail loadout onto that rail track and take the material 300 kilometers down to the coast. Very simple trains, but just to highlight, this is the proximity of it. Within the core, I sometimes show that just to highlight that you can see some of the copper flecks that are there. But overall, the deposit is well understood. I'll give you some of the geology in terms of the drilling. It's a replacement, carbonate replacement system. I don't want to get into too much of the geology, but what we have here is a very, very high-grade channeled deposit. It's got a great lateral extent. It's at surface, so it's very amenable to open pit mining. Very easy to identify from a mining point of view, the differentiation in terms of the waste and the ore. And so we'll be able to, we've done extensive drilling that was done on the property before, we've extended that. And what we've done is we've moved from the west side to the east side. What's very interesting about this is we have very, very high grade silver and manganese in the west, and as we've gone to the east, we've found incredibly high levels of copper. We tend to think that the genesis of the fluids in the system came from the east, and part of our exploration program is now to go further to the east to get copper, look for the copper. When I say copper, I mean 1.5% copper intercepts when we're out there over 20, 30 meters. So some very exciting copper that we're finding there. We published an updated resource statement at the end of December. You can see we've got 122 million ounces of silver contained in the deposit. About 400,000, that's measured in pounds there, 400,000 tons of copper and about 200,000 tons of zinc. And we have exploration drilling ongoing to expand on that. So we have a fantastic metal inventory. Rough calculations at today's price, there's $15+ billion worth of metal in the deposit currently. So we're very focused on, when you have that level of metal inventory, the ability to turn it into a viable economic project is I don't want to say straightforward, but is very, very likely and probable. And also this assessment, as you can see there, we used long-term pricing, $29 silver. So this was all done before silver went to 100 and plus, or currently about $70. So there's probably more value in it if we were to run it at the higher pricing that we've seen currently. Just a quick snapshot. That's just the deposit and a pit shell that we ran. Just you can see the purple is the bit to highlight there. That's the higher grade sort of areas. You can see it's a sort of flat surface, and it gives us a very, very easily mineable sort of a deposit, open pittable, and so we're not chasing small veins of high grade material all over the deposit. This is very, very much straightforward bulk open pit mining. As I mentioned, there's exploration potential. There's two elements. One is the Copper East, where we're going more towards the copper. We think there's higher copper and that we'll look for. We also found another intrusive, again exceptionally high copper values. We've done only surface grab samples and the like. That's part of a drilling campaign that'll be done in the second half of this year. As I mentioned, the Copper East, you can see those drills holes, 1.2%, 1.12% copper over 156, almost 660 meters. So there's a lot of upside in the Copper East sort of side that we're looking at. Flow sheet, that's been one of the concerns that we've had addressed about the project, how we're going to turn this from a mining project and yield. Very simplistic diagram here. We have far more comprehensive advancement on this. As part of the transition from the exploration team into the engineering team, we've onboarded a number of process engineers, some who have direct experience in this process. Basically, we're leaching the material, and from that we then take through different separation. Solids go onto Merrill-Crowe, which extracts the silver. Standard process, nothing unusual there. Liquids make their way through to the different precipitation units where we'll get the copper out, separate out the zinc, and then come into the high purity manganese, which I'll talk to a bit because that's the different aspect. None of the process, other than the manganese side, which is different, but the rest of the process is pretty straightforward. Leaching has been done in, I don't know how many, but hundreds of sort of locations and plants. The separation and then the precipitation of the copper and the zinc is straightforward. Merrill-Crowe for silver is the absolute industry standard. So in terms of the process flow sheet, nothing complicated. I will admit at the moment, obviously it requires quite a bit of sulfuric acid, and the price of sulfuric acid today is quite high. We wouldn't want to be paying those sort of kind of prices for this asset. So part of the deal that we would do here is build our own acid plant. The plant also requires SO2 gas, so we would build both an acid plant and we'd use desalinated water. We're right next to the coast, so we don't have to pump 3,000 meters into the air and 300 kilometers back to the mine site. We do it at the coast, so desalination when you're close to the coast is fairly cost competitive. It's not too much of a problem. It's a very arid area down at the coast. When I say arid, there's no rain, which means there's very few people except at the port. There's no animals, there's no plants. It is as close to lunar landscape as I suppose you could imagine, which definitely helps when it comes to permitting and licensing of the plant, because there's very little disruption we can have to local populations, animals, etc., etc. So just to go back to the high purity manganese bit, which is a bit of my history, I ran a company that was very, very much invested in that. The part from the process flow sheet there that's different, it requires crystallization, so precipitation and then redissolve, and then we will crystallize to make high purity manganese crystals, beautiful little pink crystals. Well, they say they're pink, but some of them that I've seen are less pink. And that's then taken forward and used to make pre-cam, which is the ultimate goal of that, is it goes into making lithium-ion batteries. And that's the new chemistry where you have nickel, cobalt, and manganese. That's the manganese that goes into batteries. So this is looking at sort of saying, as we move into more electrified cars, more use of manganese in the batteries. So that's the product we'll make. The crystallization is very well-known technology, but in manganese is new, relatively new. And that's the area we're doing a lot of test work to make sure we can answer all the questions about how will you crystallize? How will you get this done? 2 or 3 other companies have pioneered this. I was responsible for building a demonstration plant in South Africa that's done this. So we're quite confident we'll be able to do this with Aftermath. So when it comes to the flow sheet, our concerns are not in any point, it's just the new bit around the battery metal high purity manganese. To just give you a bit of a feel about that market, obviously it comes down to your view on the EV battery market. I think in recent times we've seen a number of challenges as to take-up of the vehicles as tax subsidies have sort of reduced in different locations. We've even seen that recently in China, where tax incentives reduced and therefore the number of EVs bought declined. But the general thematic of the development of EV and battery storage, which is the other very important aspect here, is obviously growing, and whilst it's growing slower, but it's still growing very fast against predictions and forecasts. The 2 elements that are, well, from a manganese point of view, are very important is manganese historically has been able to add more stability to the battery chemistry. The introduction of manganese also helps with the range, which is obviously important characteristics of the batteries. So we've started to also see within the Chinese environment, they've moved to a battery chemistry from the LFP that the Chinese groups typically use to LMFP. So I appreciate this is an alphabet soup of letters, but the introduction of the manganese into that process is why the BYDs and these sort of companies you're seeing are starting to say that they can do 500 to 1,000 miles on charge, how they can charge multiple times, and the speed at which you can charge is improving. A lot of that is to do with the manganese addition. So manganese is growing in terms of as EVs numbers grow, and then also the intensity of use of manganese. So that's why we get excited about this part. We, as a business, as I've said, before I come to that, we are very focused on the silver and the copper. That's the bankable bit for this project. We want to be able to go, once we finish our engineering studies, sit with investors and banks and say, don't worry about this part. If you have your concerns, we haven't convinced you, that's fine. You as a debt financier or investor, you can make your money here on the silver. You can back that. You can back the copper. The manganese side is the upside. That's the kicker. The warrant that you sort of take as an equity holder coming in and saying, when this gets going, I can see a huge future in it, but I don't have to simply rely on that. I can make sure that my silver and copper pay the bills and make sure the project is viable. And I think this is what I was talking about before when we're looking at trying to industrialize and how there's been the struggles in the sort of critical metal space, is that when you arrive with a project like this and a bank can understand or an investor can understand that bit, that makes it a lot easier to raise capital. It makes the project more bankable, as opposed to what we have concerns is if you just arrive with a critical metal and you're trying to convince people that my rare earths works or my manganese works on its own. And that's a difficult environment to try and convince people of EV markets, chemistry, the changes, and the customers, because the customers aren't all ready yet. You know, there's still that evolution. So you need to be able to take time for the evolution of this, whereas our business can run on silver and copper. And in time, as this market matures, we'll be able to take advantage of it. So as the exploration team has sort of shifted, they still got responsibilities up at Berenguela in terms of that, but the engineering team is kicking in there. We're doing the PFS. We'll have that done and published in the first quarter of next year. And that's moving ahead with going through all sorts of trade-off studies. But they're also now focusing in Chile on the Challacoya asset, progressing that. actually not the most fantastic picture to show with that. I think more interesting is just to look at the starting point they have in terms of the resource. We've got 36 million ounces of silver. If you put it all together, putting into gold terms, that's approaching 500,000 ounces of gold, and we haven't really scratched the surface. We've just started doing some additional work, so we'll have results coming out of that this year. So, we're very excited, and the exploration team, as I say, their first priority was at Berenguela. Now they're moving to this asset, and they've been very successful in the project development they've done so far. So we're looking forward to some good results coming out of that this year. Management team, as always, it's good to have good assets, be in a good country and a good commodity. Good management. Michael Williams and Ralph founded the company and developed it. They've got good capital markets experience. Ralph, a geologist, and Ralph and I have an Anglo-American background, so he's got some interesting experiences for working with them in different parts of the world. Mike Parker is a Scottish and Peruvian national, lives in between Arequipa and St. Andrews, which is interesting. He's almost as gloomy as Ross, breaking stereotypes, but he's lived in Peru and gone back and forth, so he has a great deal of experience there, knows the country well, fluent Spanish speaker, so that's been a fantastic addition to the team, a continuity in the team. I joined recently, taking the project from its now phase of resource and discovery through the engineering. That's the expertise, and I'm building out the team, process engineers, sustainability, and also in terms of the management of the study itself. So we're expanding the team and transitioning and giving the exploration team more targets to go after to advance in terms of both at Berenguela and in Peru and in Chile. So in summary, why we think it's an exciting opportunity thematically. We see the process moving in terms of industrialization to, as Ross mentioned, we think there is more money flowing into the sector, finally. I don't think it's a rush, but I think there is a sustained level of investment coming to help in terms of industrialization. We think there's the sort of more precious metal element with the silver, but also what we noticed recently with the spike in silver is the demand that comes out of the solar panels. This was a new demand in the last 5+ years, so there is a greater industrial need for silver as well as the sort of precious metal investment element. The copper is there, which again is intrinsic and the building block for all of the industrialization that's about to come through. And the second sort of phase of it is that we think we've got a good opportunity to develop a business in the manganese, the high purity manganese, to flow into the car battery industry. So exciting news through this year. As I said, we've got exploration results that are already coming through from Berenguela, some great copper results. We've got the news coming out of Chile at Choyacoya, and the feasibility study, which I've no doubt, since I'm leading, will be an absolute success. And that's pretty much us for Aftermath.
Thank you very much.